Hello and welcome to this three-day conference on sustainable finance for Asia's transition to net zero. This is a joint event with ADBI and the University of London SOAS. My name is John Byrne, Vice Chair of Research at ADBI. Over the next 3 days, we will have presentations by researchers and scholars in this field, as well as some policy discussions by policymakers from government and other think tanks. We will start today with opening remarks. There will be two sets of opening remarks, one by the Dean of ADBI, Tetsushi Shinobe, and the other by Professor Uli Volz, who's Professor of Economics at University of London SOAS, and also he is Director for the Centre for Sustainable Finance at SOAS as well. So I would like to hand over to Atsuko-san, who will now play the video of Tetsushi Shinobe, who is unable to join us today, unfortunately, live. So please, Atsuko, go ahead.
Greetings from Tokyo. It's a great pleasure to provide some opening remarks for this 3-day conference on sustainable finance for Asia's net zero transition, hosted jointly by SOAS Center for Sustainable Finance and ADBI. Though it's a pity that I cannot participate in it more than this pre-recorded video due to my travels. Thank you, Professor Volz, for your continued support for ADBI, including this event. Financing climate transition is a major global policy challenge. Achieving net zero carbon emissions globally by 2050 is set to require an enormous amount of investment, which may reach $125 trillion. As Asia accounts for a large share of global carbon emissions, it may need to shoulder a large share of financial burden accordingly. But fiscal space is limited and narrow in this region, as in the other regions, after fiscal policy responses to the COVID-19 pandemic. Financing constraints are particularly acute among developing countries, where public debt has accumulated due to the health crisis and the subsequent energy and food crisis, as well as their fragile economic and social conditions. Challenges for Asia are compounded by rapidly growing demand for energy, together with the considerably uneven availability of renewable energy resources and the considerably uneven access to low-carbon technologies across countries within the region. Significant uncertainty remains regarding how low-carbon transition can be achieved in Asia. The magnitude of financing challenges and the tight constraints on fiscal policy mean the need for the large-scale mobilization of private capital. What's needed to facilitate private sector participation at scale? Of course, private capital providers, domestic or global, consider transition-related risk and return profile and how this profile fits their risk appetite. In other words, key elements include 1, credible transition-related disclosure and data, 2, innovative financing schemes that mitigate transition finance risks, and 3, effective transition finance criteria. Urgent action of policymakers is needed to help build up a system that provides these elements for private capital providers. This conference will explore policy challenges posed by the need for scalable, sustainable finance for the transition to net zero carbon emissions in Asia. Over the 3 days, 12 research papers will be presented by scholars on relevant issues such as public-private partnership for energy transition, factors driving just transition, and sustainable linked bond financing arrangements. There will be 3 keynote speeches by practitioners, one on each day. Thank you very much for the keynote speakers Sean Kidney, Eugene Wong, and Kathleen McKenna. The event will conclude with a policy panel discussion chaired by Junkyu Lee, ADB's Chief of Finance Sector Group. Thanks to Junkyu and distinguished panelists. Last but not least, special thanks to the organizing team. With that, I hope all speakers and participants will have fruitful discussions to eventually promote Asia's net zero transition. Thank you very much.
And we will now turn to opening remarks by Professor Uli Waltz, who's Professor of Economics and Director of the Centre for Sustainable Finance at SOAS University of London, and who was instrumental in this joint event in terms of putting it together with ADBI. So Uli, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, John, and hello from London, where it's still quite early. So on behalf of the SOAS Centre for Sustainable Finance, I'd also like to extend a very warm welcome to all speakers and participants of this conference. And I would also very much like to thank the ADBI for this great collaboration, and in particular you, John, and Keiko Mitsuguchi, and also Lee Nyok. And let me make some short remarks on the topic of the conference. So the science is very clear. Globally, we need to reduce net zero emissions by 2050, and about half of the emission cuts must be in place by 2030 to keep warming below 1.5 centigrades. And fossil fuel production, for example, must be decline by around 6% annually over the next couple of years until 2030. And the Asia-Pacific region currently produces more than the combined total emissions of all other regions. And so it's not an exaggeration to say that the success or the failure to keep global warming to 1.5 degrees or at least below 2 degrees and avoid catastrophic climate change depends to a very large degree on what is going to happen in the Asia-Pacific region in the next couple of years. And when saying that, I don't want to play down the responsibility for historical emissions, which have been coming primarily produced in Europe and North America, or gloss over the patterns of consumption in Europe and North America that are related to large parts of these emissions. But the fact remains that we need to decarbonize fast, including across the Asia-Pacific region. And of course, also acknowledging the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities that's enshrined in the Paris Agreement. But we have to be very clear. To move towards a net zero economy really requires unprecedented structural changes, and this transformation that we need to see will affect all countries, including developing countries in the Asia-Pacific, and all sectors of the economy. And that's going to happen either directly or indirectly. And to make the transition happen, we need an enormous amount of investment in low carbon and climate resilient infrastructure in all kinds of areas, energy systems, in particular transportation, other critical areas of infrastructure. And finance, therefore, is absolutely central to this story. So we need to mobilize trillions of dollars. And if we look at the experiences of the last decades, we haven't been very successful at all in mobilizing both public and private capital. So we need to find better ways of doing that. But very importantly, we need not only scale up green and sustainable finance and get all these investments rolling, we also need to stop the financing of dirty economic activities. And for the time being, the financial sector continues to pour trillions of dollars annually into the fossil economy, so working directly against the goals that we wish to achieve. So we need to really change finance. We need to align finance with the climate goals, with other nature and sustainability goals. And for this, we also need to see strong changes in governance. And I would like to emphasize that we also, in this context, need to see an important role of central banks, supervisors, other financial authorities to really make sure that finance is going to be aligned with climate and sustainability goals. So over the next 3 days, we'll hear a lot of interesting presentations, have interesting discussion on how we can align finance with climate sustainability goals, how to make the transition happen. And it's my very great pleasure to now introduce my dear friend and colleague, Sean Kidney, to kick us off with a keynote speech. And Sean really doesn't need an introduction. Anyone in sustainable finance, I think, knows him. He's CEO of the Climate Bonds Initiative, has been a pioneer in pushing this whole sustainable finance agenda. He's been around the world and really providing advice to lots of governments and other institutions on how to get this transition going. So we're most delighted to have him. I should mention that he's also a professor of practice in sustainable finance at SOAS University of London. So we're also benefiting greatly from his expertise, and he's been very generous in sharing his time with us and also our students. So without further ado, let me hand over to Sean for his keynote, and there should be around 10 minutes of time for Q&A after his speech. So please put your questions in the chat or in the Q&A function that you can see in Zoom. Sean, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Uli. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here talking to people. Yes, you're right. We've got rather a challenge going forward. We know, well, as Uli said, really, that the scale of what we have to do is vast. Look, the challenge is a little bit existential, in fact. The truth is, as became clear at the COP conference in Sharm el-Sheikh last year, that we've lost the fight against climate change, that 1.5 degrees Celsius will now be reached in the next few years, somewhere between now and 2030. And then we'll be shifting on to 2 degrees and realistically 2.5 degrees at the best possible trajectory. In other words, we have failed utterly to avert climate change, as has been our objective, signed up by all the nations of the world for the last 30 years. There's too much latency now. What we're in a race to do is to stop catastrophic climate change. And if you look at some of the lectures by Johan Rockström from the Potsdam Institute for Climate Change Research in Berlin recently, you'll see what I mean. This is where we see the collapse of the Greenland ice shelf, the possible collapse of the Amazon, the possible collapse of the West Antarctic ice shelf, and so on. Of course, scientists don't know exactly what's going to happen. This is rather uncharted territory for the human species. The human species has not actually been on this planet at any time with atmospheric concentrations of CO2 as high as they are now, let alone what they will be in 50 years, which is double what they are now on current trajectories. We're in uncharted territory. In fact, the last time we saw temperatures as hot as they're likely to be at the end of the century, we had alligators at the North Pole. We had tropical rainforest in Antarctica. That's what we're going into. The changes in terms of our existing habitats are unimaginable. The averting of catastrophic climate change, which is what we'd most likely be able to do if we meet Uli's targets or Uli's stated goal of cutting emissions by half by 2030, would still ensure significant and substantial change to the climate. That's baked in now. So while we continue to reduce our emissions and work to reduce our emissions quickly, we also need to be ensuring that we transition to a more resilient economy, that we prepare for the storm surges, the typhoons in East Asia that are likely to be 2 times as intense as they currently are, the droughts, as we saw in Sichuan last year, where we not only had a shortage of hydropower, but we had intense heat, which saw people collapse in queues for COVID vaccines and a massive spike in air conditioning use. The consequences of this are going to be very tricky. One of the consequences is likely to be increased energy use in the short term using fossil fuels. China has just announced an expansion of its coal-fired fleet of power stations. Why? Because over the last summer, the provision of electricity from hydro dropped dramatically, thanks to reduced water availability, thanks to climate change, and the utilization of air conditioning went through the roof as people struggled to cope with extreme heat, thanks to climate change. It's a bit of a known goal. So we increase fossil fuel power to try and make sure the power stays on, which potentially makes things significantly worse. We've got a lot to do. Let's call it a transition. We're now in a situation where the world needs to consider transition at a very fast speed. There are many different kinds of transition. The first thing to say is that there's no rocket science involved here. We don't need to wait till someone invents a gamma ray cannon to solve the problems. We know what to do on the emissions reductions side of it. In Japan, for example, where we've seen substantial and significant progress by the Ministry of Economic Trade and Industry on developing roadmaps for transition, technology transition, to meet the Prime Minister's dramatic emission reduction targets by 2030. We've seen fantastic progress. Is it enough? There's work still to be done. For example, it's clear in a report that came out this week about Japan's energy transition that we could actually do more if we push things further on solar energy, on wind energy, on grid integration. Every country is in this position. They're looking at what needs to be done. They're starting to work on it. And they're discovering, you know what, there are further horizons, if only with this, this, and this. That is the essence of the transition conversation. And what is stressed, the transition is not just reducing emissions, although that is the dominant discourse in Asia. It's also a transition to resilience. We need to ensure, as I said earlier, that our societies are prepared for what are going to be regular and frequent shocks coming through our system. You know, the last time we had significant climate change on this planet was in the 1600s. We had 2 degrees cooling. We now know, thanks to research at Stanford University, that the reason we had that was because we introduced measles and smallpox to the Americas. In the 1500s, it killed off so many people, up to 95% of the Indian population. Whole civilizations in the Amazon disappeared, that we saw massive forestry growth. That forestry growth was so vast, it sucked carbon out of the atmosphere and led, with feedback loops of various sorts, to a cooling of the planet. I mean, in a way, oddly and horribly, a kind of hope, because if we could grow forest cover globally by 50% in the next 20 years, we would actually contribute substantially to the changes needed. But that would require massive forestry growth in tropical countries, ASEAN, India, the Amazon, Africa. And we haven't yet figured out the financial incentives. Whoa, we need to work on that. The experience of people in the 1600s of 2 degrees cooling was not changing sea levels. It was pretty harsh. We saw successive summers without heat, and therefore the collapse of crops, famines. We saw plagues, pandemics happen again and again. And we saw war as a result of these kinds of disruptions, conflict on an unimaginable scale. In Germany, 50% of the population died during the 30 Years' War. In fact, China was equally affected. India was equally affected. There was only one country that survived this, which is the Tokugawa, Japan. In the beginning of the 1600s, a shogun, a strong government had come into power. And while Japan still continued to feel the impacts of climate change, They at least made sure that the bridges were rebuilt every time they were washed away, that the granaries were opened to people when famines occurred. And as a result, Japan survived without large-scale loss of life, unlike all the other countries. We lost a third of the world's population in the 1600s. I need to say that because we have to understand the stakes, the risks that we are currently taking with the global economy. And let's be very clear, the most exposed parts of the world are in East Asia, in South Asia, and Southeast Asia. Large populations, highly vulnerable to the kind of changes we're making. The solutions that we want to have are pretty simple, as I said. Energy, we have to shift to clean energy as quickly as we can. That's a transition. We need a shift in our industrial stock, I should say. In Japan, for example, the program of METI is to shift steel, to shift cement, to shift other industries to become low carbon very quickly. We applaud that. We see a similar discussion underway in India. We see a discussion underway in ASEAN as well. We published the Climate Bonds Initiative, a transition program for ASEAN last month. In agriculture, we have to see this transition as well. We need to be looking at crops that are resilient to the changes coming through. We also need to be considering crops that are better at sequestration rather than releasing carbon from the soil. You know, maize, corn, for example, is very bad at sequestering carbon in the soil, whereas quinoa, that fashionable food of young people now, is very good at fixing carbon in the soil. How can we shift our agricultural production to ensure that we manage carbon and keep carbon in the soil, one of the great potential sources of sequestration? We need to make sure that our social plans and thinking for the world are addressed in a way that ensures the resilience of our society. How do we ensure equity? How do we ensure the kind of world where people will work together rather than work apart? How do we support the education of women so they're better prepared for the changes coming through? In Bangladesh, a third of climate-related deaths are women, mainly amongst people who are ill-educated, not able to get access to information. There are so many aspects to this issue, including health, of course. We've learned from the pandemic. There are ways that we need to manage our health sector to ensure the best possible result through a crisis. We've just run a global experiment of 3 years of how to do this. This is what we need to learn how to do. So look, there's a lot to be done. The high emissions trajectory that we've been on for the last 200 years is the first and most urgent thing that we need to do. Above all, we need to shift from coal. We're welcoming, for example, the coal decommissioning programs that have been developed in Indonesia, in Vietnam, in the Philippines at the moment, as a way of accelerating the shutdown of high fossil fuel energy and replacing those with renewable energies going forward. This is exactly the sort of audacious thinking that we need to have going forward in every country. And that includes in Warsaw in the US, as well as in South Africa and Brazil. All of this, as our first speaker said today, will require a lot of capital. McKinsey's framed it as around $9.2 trillion US per annum, plus the extra cost of adapting and changing our infrastructure and societies to address resilience. How do we do this? Well, it is very clear that we need to be certain about what to do. We can make some terrible mistakes. To give an example, for the last 30 years, we've been talking about gas as a transition mechanism. In fact, most of our national climate change plans have incorporated gas as a key transition fuel. But we've now discovered that there are two challenges. The first, in the words of the International Energy Agency in the Net Zero for 2050 plan, is that the window to be able to have a glide path into lower emissions and then clean has gone. The sharpness of the reduction we need to achieve is so great that actually we don't have time for new gas. There is no space in any of the models. Yes, there'll be different glide paths as we sweat our assets and slowly but surely close them. But new don't fit the model. And then we found another problem. According to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and to various other reports over the last couple of years, we've seen a massive spike of emissions from the gas industry, from shipping and from extraction of gas over the last 10 years. We have a problem. Gas, the methane in gas, is 84 times as potent as CO2. A little bit of leakage blows out all the numbers. And that's what we've seen happening. In fact, it's now doubtful that gas is much better than coal when it comes to emissions. That is a real difficult situation, especially given how much we've been relying on the transition. We now need to recalibrate and start thinking how we move forward without that particular path, because it's not in practice, once we bring in the life cycle emissions, helping us much, which is a real pain in the neck, I can tell you. These kinds of understandings are being developed as we go. The truth is, as I said before, we've never done this before. Scientists are learning and contributing as we go. We need to accept there will be changes like around gas and then embrace them and work with them when they happen. Investors are interested. We have, luckily in the world, more than enough capital to meet that challenge set by McKinsey's by our first speaker today. We have about, just in the institutional investment sector, about $130 trillion of assets under management. In fact, we're extraordinarily lucky that, and I say this with an odd choice of the word, while we face what is essentially a species-defying challenge, a potential threat to the whole civilization, we actually have more capital amassed now on the planet than ever before in human history, which could be mobilized to address this problem. In that sense, we are lucky. Large slabs of that capital are invested in places where they're not giving a good return to the holders of that capital, where they can't pay adequately the pensions that they're committed to pay. For example, in Germany, much capital is invested in negative interest rate German bunds. It needs to be redeployed to better investments that can play a better return. This is the opportunity we have now. If we can create the right kind of investability in transition investments, as we are beginning to do already in the energy sector, capital will flow. Capital especially wants green. Among institutional investors, people with actuaries who understand climate tables, we have an acute awareness of the risks to portfolios of climate change. That's been driven the last couple of years by a growing appreciation that countries are acting, thanks to the US President's Climate Summit a couple of years ago, where every major economy in the world committed to strong 2030 and 2050 and 2060 targets. We now have a belief amongst investors that the future has been decided. It will be green. The only challenge is how quickly we're going to get there. That changes everything, because it means that the tsunami is coming through, everyone believes, and they need to now prepare for how to take advantage of it and how to ensure they're not being overwhelmed by it. The sandbox of investments that are called green or transition are seen now as lower risk in terms of investment strategy. These are preferential investments. And we see the impact of that in the green bond market, which has gone from 2 billion to 2.2 trillion in the last 10 years, outstanding, where we see major levels of higher levels of oversubscription rates and improved pricing in many countries, whether that be in Japan or in India or in Egypt or in Europe. In India recently, the government issued a green sovereign bond to finance things like renewable energy, and they got a 6 basis points benefit compared to the standard vanilla bonds that the government issues, same credit rating, because of the interest in the intentionality of the investments amongst domestic investors, and that wasn't international. We have demand appetite at an enormous level now. What we need to do is act on making sure those investments are available for people to make. In the industrial sector, that requires, or gives us a window, I should say, to ensure that we can shift our steel industry to becoming, in developed countries, focused on electric arc furnaces, recycling, or bringing in iron pellets from emerging markets, to hydrogen-based blast filters, which are going to be built in places like India and Saudi Arabia and Morocco in the next few years, using renewable energy generated green hydrogen. In the cement industry, we need to change the way we're using energy, change our clinker collection, cleanse our source materials, and using carbon capture and sequestration. In the chemicals industry, we need to shift to bio feedstocks, as well as changing the utilization rates to make it much more efficient. We can quite easily, for example, reduce our fertilizer utilization around the world by 50%, saving enormous amounts of environmental impact as phosphates are currently destroying waterways. But we can also shift our fertilizer production away from gas-generated fertilizer to hydrogen, green hydrogen generated, green ammonia, and then fertilizer. In every sector that we're looking at, there are pathways that we can pursue. In the shipping sector now, we have Japanese and Singaporean companies actively pursuing biomethanol or ammonia fuel ships to replace bunker fuels, which would make a substantial change. Even in aviation, where we have the possibility of putting drop-in synthetic fuels into the bulk of the existing fleet. We could, in planes that are from the last 10 years or so, have a 100% drop-in. That would actually reduce emissions in aviation by 60%. We just need the large-scale production contracts to allow the delivery of adequate amounts of biokerosene. Companies like Neste and Shell, who have business in this area, tell us they can deliver. We just need the contracts. You can sort of see we're on the cusp of an extraordinary revolution here. That's the revolution that would transition our economies to become low carbon. And if we get it right, if we get the planning right, climate resilience as well. We do need to preferentially reduce capital costs. This is where organizations like the Asian Development Bank are so important, that is now bringing in preferential lending for green investments and transition investments to support countries change. Not only that, but agencies like JBIC in Japan are also setting up things like a green infrastructure investment fund in India with the National Infrastructure Investment Fund. These kinds of setting up of vehicles which will preferentially support the transitions we need are essential, timely, and important. We need more of them, of course. Rich countries have a critical role in buying down the cost of capital in developing markets in such a way as making choices easier for the governments of Indonesia, the governments of Vietnam, the governments of Thailand to be able to pick green without what is currently there, the capital cost penalty, if they decide to do so. Most of these things are high capital cost. We have an opportunity here to change the world in a way that we need to do, we must do, if we are to provide a future for our children, a future that's sustainable, a future that we will be happy for them to live in. We do need to act. We need to bring imagination to bear. We need to be audacious and ambitious. There is no other path, or at least the other path is a disastrous path, a catastrophic path. I'm confident we can do this, but boy, we're really keeping it to the last minute. But now the times have changed. Investors are keen. I can tell you that everywhere around the world. I look forward to the changes we're going to see this year and next year in at least developing our transition planning and preparing, and then starting to move the capital in the volume that's needed. Thank you, Uli.
Thank you so much, Sean, for a very thoughtful speech, which was at the same time kind of rather depressing, but also very uplifting. So We do have a couple of minutes for Q&A. I don't see questions in the chat as yet. So let me put the first question to you. You mentioned that investors do now believe that the future will be green and that they're ready to move this direction. But at the same time, right now, we're also seeing a lot of money flowing into all sorts of areas where it really shouldn't be going. Yeah, so the carbon sector is really seeing a huge expansion right now, and you know these should be all stranded assets going forward. But what do you make out of this mismatch between what really should happen and you say investors are getting to understand, and what is actually happening right now?
A lot of that cash going into fossil fuels is excess cash from energy companies now, rather than necessarily long-term investors, I want to stress. But there's a lot of sources of capital around the world. You know, very large profits are being made thanks to a war in Ukraine, which, by the way, is a petrostate war, right? We're talking about a petrostate autocrat using fossil fuel revenues from the European Union to invade a neighbor. That's a petrostate war. The implication, and this is the sorts of conflicts we're going to see a lot more of going forward. What you're not seeing, though, is long-term commitments being signed. You know, when Senegal has been trying to develop its gas fields recently, it's been looking for state support from Germany because it's had a challenge getting adequate private sector investment to do long-term 30-year return kind of development in their plans. A lot of the investments are in things that can be brought on stream quickly, where money can be made quite quickly. Against that, and there's no doubt there's money to be made in the next few years, but against that is this appreciation that the hydrogen economy is about to go mad, because we're now seeing price points in the provision of green hydrogen at levels that were unheard of 3 or 4 years ago. In fact, we're seeing what we're going to be expected to be 2030 and 2040 prices now start appearing in 2025, 2026 in terms of contracts being signed at the moment. And that is a severe risk for the methane and gas industry in terms of opportunity, because green hydrogen is seen as a legitimate solution for the future. Methane and gas is now being delegitimized in terms of transition plans, and therefore there's risk involved. There's a regulatory risk involved in that too. In the coal industry, we are seeing a short-term growth, especially in places like Europe and in China this year. But at the same time, we've seen an enormous, in Europe, uptick of investment in renewable energy in the last 12 months since the war broke out. In fact, Europe is now talking about meeting its 2030 targets earlier for renewable energy by 2025 or 2026 because of the increased push on renewable energy and also on things like energy efficiency through the Repower EU and various other programs. China, by the way, while it's building some more coal-fired plants this year to make sure it can power the air conditioners next summer, has actually invested more this year in renewable energy in terms of volume deployed than ever before. In fact, for the last 15 years, it's been the largest investor in renewable energy in the world, year in, year out. It continues to grow. So there are some counter indicators, if you like, Uli, that we need to be tracking in the energy sector. We also need to be looking at changes in other sectors, like that change in the steel industry, that will reduce forward demand for coal and gas and increase demand for hydrogen. In the auto industry, the shift towards electric vehicles is happening at an extraordinary speed. We will see the reduction in demand for petrol become apparent in about 2 years' time. We're going to see an upward spike this year as the Chinese economy recovers. But remember, the Chinese economy is already now 20% electric vehicle or thereabouts and moving very fast. As that grows, the demand for oil drops off in China. China is the engine of the global oil industry. As demand drops, prices will gyrate on a downward trend. This is not going to take 4 years. This is going to take the next 10 years. So for fossil fuels, I often say to bankers in the sector, make money while you can, but don't take any long-term bets. We're now in an era of short-term bets as we see the beginnings of death throes, this sector, and countries need to plan accordingly too. You know, if you're an importer country in gas, one of the things you've learned over the last 6 months is this is a volatile and dangerous commodity. If you can find a way to get off it, and oh, by the way, renewable energy is now way more competitive in every tropical nation than gas, then you should shift. And that's something that we're seeing.
Thank you so much, Sean. And again, you know, I always appreciate your upbeatness on how to tackle this enormous challenge. I have another challenge, which is I just have 2 questions in the Q&A. However, I have to be strict on time, and we're technically now transitioning into the first paper session. So I would, Sean, I don't know if you have to drop off immediately, but if you could possibly have a go at answering the questions in the Q&A, that would be fantastic. Apologies to George and Mukesh, but I can't ask Sean to answer them in person now. But thank you so much, Sean. This was really fantastic, and we will proceed now with the first session. So the first session is on risk sharing, blended finance, and private sector investment. And we have 4 very interesting papers. And the rules of the game are as follows. We have 35 minutes for each paper, and that involves 20 minutes for the presenter. Then we have 8 minutes for the discussant, and then 7 minutes for Q&A. So everyone can chip in and put their questions in the Q&A or raise their hand if they are panelists or speakers. And I would like to ask all presenters to really stick to their time. I will be ruthless in enforcing the timing so that we have enough time for each paper. I'd like to move on to the second paper on the impact of Indian corporates' net zero transition carbon neutrality announcements on their share prices. And we have Kruti Upadhyay, who is an independent researcher who will deliver this paper. And then we'll have Ranjita Mishra from the Reserve Bank of India as a discussant. Kruti, please.
All right. I'll share my screen first. All right. Good afternoon and good morning, everyone, wherever you guys are joining this presentation from. My research topic is impact of Indian corporates net zero transition carbon neutrality advancement on their share prices. So the basic idea is the way net zero transition is happening and what kind of efforts being done at the public level and at the private sector level. So all these things put together, how we are moving forward. I have tried to do this research in the Indian context and connect it with the Indian corporates. As we have been hearing from the other speakers that what kind of transition funding is required, what kind of amounts are required. Some of the data, as you guys can see on your screens, these are the world level data. And as we can see that there is an improvement from the 2000 level to 2020 level. The combined efforts of the public and private financing has increased, but as we heard in the morning, it's not enough. Coming to the other points, what kind of companies are joining, and like though there are companies who have joined the Science Based Target Initiative, 4,420 companies have enrolled, and there are companies who are actually committed to transition is only 1,628 companies. So there are still many things which needs to be done. There is still some gap which needs to be filled. Now we come to the India. Last in the COP26 at the Glasgow, Indian government has agreed that will try and reach net zero transition in 2070. So now it's more important as an India, as a country, to make this transition happen. And there are some few reports which have tried to estimate what kind of investment requirement would be there. but time and again it has been highlighted at many places that public resource is scarce and there is not enough resources. There has to be a matching resource from the private financing, which has to diverted to the transition. And this is what the government of India has tried to do at the Indian Climate Change Forum. They have tried to sign an agreement with the private sector companies and make the champions do the transition, help in transition, and make some pledges in the transition. And I have this forum, India CEO Forum on Climate Change, happened on the 5th November 2020. I have taken that particular announcement as an event, so that this private sector companies had come together and they had said, yes, we would like to do these changes and we would like to contribute to the transition. And what kind of and they had entered into the agreement with the Ministry of Forest and Climate Change in the India. And this news, I have taken this particular news event as an event for the event study. And I have there were 24 companies in total who had agreed to who have agreed to this agreement. The research objectives, as mentioned, are that if there are any significant, due to this news, there were any significant abnormals written for this particular company, set of companies, we want to also examine that if there is any significant difference in the trading volumes, which would help in understanding how the investors have reacted. Another thing which we have tried to understand in this research paper is that what kind of reaction institutional investors had after coming across this particular news. These are the hypotheses which we have assumed. For the abnormal returns or null hypothesis is investors do not receive any significant abnormal returns due to the announcement related to the company's intention of contributing to towards the climate change. And alternative hypothesis is that they did receive some significant abnormal returns. For the trading volume, we have the null hypothesis. This says that there is no significant difference in the means of the two sample trading volume of shares before and after the climate change announcement. An alternative hypothesis is there is a significant difference in the mean of the two samples of trading volume before and after the event. Method which we have taken is, as I said earlier, it's the event study method. We have tried to, for this method, we have considered the stock prices of the selected companies 15 days before the event, on the event date inclusive, and the 15 days after the event. That is the event window. We have taken S&P BSC Carbonex index as the considered benchmark index for investigating this impact of this event. As I said that the announcement happened on the 5th November, we have considered it as a event day. 15 days after the event and 15 days before the event, we have done the calculations for abnormal return, cumulative abnormal return, trading volume differences. We have used t-test techniques to analyze what is the difference, what is the impact of this announcement. Only thing which we have to say, I have to highlight is that for this particular research, we have considered p-value or significance level of the 5% or 0.05. When the null hypothesis if the value is less than 0.05, the null hypothesis gets rejected. There were 24 companies in total who had agreed to the ministry for this particular event. But due to there were few companies which are not listed. There are few companies which were not the part of the larger index. Hence, we had to stick to only 12 companies which were already in the part of this SNB BSE Carbonex index, which is actually tracking the companies who are tackling the climate change related issues. So that index is specifically dedicated for this thing. For this research, we have collected data from the sites of the BSE and NSE website. BSE is for the benchmark index and NSE is for the company share prices. And we have one second. We have considered the period for the starting from 14 October to the 26th November. We have only included the days when there was a trading which was happening, and like Saturday, Sundays were not included in this particular window. Now we start with the results and discussions. If we say that we have taken the abnormal returns on the select days. Before I start discussing this, only one thing I want to highlight is that on the 5th November, this announcement happened around after 4 p.m. India time. Actually, share markets closes around 3:30. So this actual impact would be coming on the very next day, like on the 6th November. So that's why I've taken, if we are discussing the result, we have taken it from the first day after the event. So as we highlight that, as we can see from the results, that there are five companies which has got a positive abnormal return on the very next day of the event. Somehow there is a mixed bag kind of reaction on the other days as well. But immediate reaction was only 5 companies which has got the positive returns, and the other companies had the negative reaction. Companies with the significant abnormal returns here. There were as I said, we had calculated the abnormal returns for the minus 15 to plus 15 days and minus 15 to and plus 15 days. This is a list where if we see that Ambuja Cement and the SRF Limited has significant significant negative and positive reaction from the investor on the event day itself. There are few after event, there are a few other companies, say for example, for JSW Steel, Mahindra and Mahindra, Tata Motors, there were significant positive returns on the announcement after the announcement happened on the N+9 and N+15 days. Here there are other companies, say for example Dr. Reddy's Limited, and the there was on the doctors on N+3 days, Dr. Reddy's had negative abnormal return. These are the significant results which I have highlighted in this particular table. Cumulative abnormal returns for the selected days. If we saw the cumulative abnormal return is considered over the entire event window. So like for ACC, if we see, there was a minor change in the cumulative abnormal returns. That is, it just swing from minus 0.07 to positive 0.93. But if we consider companies such as ACC or ITC or JSW Steel or others, there was a very positive abnormal stock reaction, price reaction. For others, say for example Ambuja Cement, Dr. Reddy's, Sun Pharma, there was a negative cumulative abnormal stock price. When we come to average abnormal return, it's being calculated for the entire stock range. So like it's like across the stocks. It's not for the particular stock. It's entire bouquet of 12 stocks which has been considered for calculating average abnormal return and cumulative average abnormal return. Both these tables are for the bouquet of stocks. When it can be observed that that for the days from N to that is event day till N+5, null hypothesis gets rejected. Also for N+9 and to N+14, hypothesis gets rejected at the 5% significant level. For cumulative abnormal average abnormal returns for the 3 days before the event, that is from N-3 to N and to event day to N+12, null hypothesis gets rejected. For the days mentioned, there was a significant reaction from the investor. We have calculated this across the stocks just to avoid the idiosyncrasy of the stocks in the results. And when we look at the cumulative, it's for the average abnormal return. When we look at the cumulative average abnormal return, it is good to see the aggregate effect of how we are. It's not only single day; it's like aggregate effect of entire event window, which gets reflected into the cumulative average abnormal return. So that's the reason why we have gotten into calculation this as well. Trading volume activity of the shortlisted companies in this particular case. Even though we had selected 12 companies, there were in this. I'm sorry, I'm mixing it up with the shareholding pattern. Sorry. These are the again trading volume activity for 12 companies. We had done calculation for the all 12 companies, and for individual companies as well. I have just highlighted for all the 12 companies together. It shows that there is a result shows that there is a significant difference in the average trading volume activity of the listed companies before and after the announcement. It implies simply that before the announcement there was a more trading as compared to the after the announcement, which can be seen as that, like there were the stocks changed a lesser hand post the event. It was higher before the event, so that's in a way it's a positive thing. Again, these are not these are just a comparison, that if there is a company which is being traded on the stock exchange on the event day, what was the volume as compared to 15 days prior, what was the volume. So these are just a comparison which is being highlighted. Some of the results which I would like to highlight is for Dr. Reddy's laboratory, which there was a negative lesser volume which was being traded, which implies that there was less investors which changed the hand, or there was a for Reliance Industries and SRF, there was a higher traded volume which was traded, which implies that many shareholders traded the securities. When it comes to lower traded, it can be seen that, like, investors long term and short term interest are in alignment, so there was a lesser volume which was being traded. This one is a long-term view. In this particular case, we have taken the not from the 5th November, but we have tried to capture the company's performance, share price performance as compared to the benchmark index from the 13th October to the 13th of January. SRF Limited was got split on the 12th of October, so we avoided that part because it would show a drastic change in the it was an event which would have a drastic change in the stock price. So we discarded that part, and we have taken from 13th October to 13th January. If we look at the broader picture, if we see the blue line, if you can see this cursor, this blue line is the benchmark index. Most of the companies are performing in the line of this particular index. There is no significant deviation in terms of, like, if it's not trading way higher or way below, or there is no significant trend change in the performance of this company's share prices. So this is the one broad picture. Another broad picture we try to look at is the shareholding pattern of the particular companies. In this particular slide, if you see, the total green shows that there was a change in the increase in that particular company's shareholding. These are like institutional investor, including mutual funds, foreign portfolio investor, financial institutions, insurance companies, and any other. There are a few other segments which are not that much actively working in this particular investments in this particular you can say companies. So we have excluded those categories, and we have included this many only which are very active. And we are if we look at individual categories, mutual funds had negative this thing. When we look at, they had decreased the shareholding from September 2020 to December 2020. This in between this particular period, there happened this event had taken place. So we have taken September 2020 and December 2022 shareholding patterns and analyzed it. If we look at the specific particular category, which I would like to highlight here, is the foreign portfolio investors. For almost all the companies, that has increased, apart from Reliance Industries, which we can see that there is already a pressure, or you can say, as earlier presenter said, that institutional investors have some role in play, which we are making them get into the things which are more neutral towards carbon, or which are tackling climate change or some issues. So this also gets reflected in these companies as well. So this is the broader picture.
You have 3 more minutes.
Sure. I'm just on the conclusion slide. So if we look at the entire presentation or entire paper, what we have realized is that, yes, there are few companies for which in the short run, say, for example, 1 or 2 days, investors have tried to realign themselves from the perspective of that, of as an investor, if I might not want to be in a part of the company which is agreeing to this particular kind of course. So there is some kind of alignment that is happening, and there are few investors which have not given higher value to this thing, or which have given higher value to this thing. But in a long term, if we look at the entire picture, it is like there is no that much significant difference, or there are not adverse impact of this particular news on the performance of the companies, which is like, if we look at it, it's overall doing a good. And if we see, there are still companies who are trying to align, they are taking steps, but there are few reasons which are making them holding them back in taking, they are looking at their bottom lines, and they are seeing that, okay, how I should go about it, if I should or if I should not. But if we look at a greater good, then yeah, this kind of company should be, in a longer run, there is not that much of impact. So yes, that they should move ahead with the kind of commitments they are giving to the country, or they are participating in the climate change at some level of at some level. Apart from this, if we look at, there are some few further things which we can add, and companies can also do some kind of at their level, they can align at the policy, at their strategies, mission and vision level, and then they can incorporate this cautiously, and they can reap the benefits of this particular agreement. But for this particular companies, if we say from the India perspective, it would be crucial that we look there, we see that over the 4-5 years, how they are performing, and what kind of commitments they have given, and how they are going to achieve them. So that would be a crucial thing, and that would be one more thing which we would like to keep looking at. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Kruti. And without further ado, I'd like to invite Ranjita Mishra, who is an economist at the Reserve Bank of India, to deliver the comments.
Thank you, Professor Bowles. It's always been a privilege to be a part of ADBI conferences. And so today I'll be discussing the paper titled Impact of Indian Corporates Net Zero Transition Announcement on Their Share Prices. So first of all, I would like to congratulate Kruti Upadhyay and Raghu Dharampuri Tirumala for their very good work. And I really enjoyed reading through this paper, and it was very informative, and I like it. It is very topical and covers most part of the discussion going around about how to transit towards greener. Yes, so the objective of this paper was to evaluate the reaction of investors to the announcement of net zero transition of the listed companies. So it is also very important because this has talked about private investment, like how to bring about investment to the climate causes. And so in this regard, they had a list of companies, though it were only 12. And they looked at the significant abnormality after they announced for their zero transition, net zero transition. And then the second objective was the trade, how this announcement affected their trade volume and their shareholding pattern. So for this paper, they have used event study approach. And the broad findings suggest that investors react significantly to the announcement, which implies that post-announcement investors align their interests in terms of climate change handling, which is a good news. And then they also saw that foreign portfolio investment of these companies considered those announcements as positive and increased their share in those companies which were studies. Okay, so I have a few comments and a few questions, which if they want, they can consider. So my first question is how this event window was decided. So as we see that even they have taken an event window of 15 days. So as we all know that climate is a very long-term thing. I mean, even if the companies are committing for their alignment with government policies towards net zero transmission, it is already, I mean, in case of India, it is already 50 years ahead. So what is the rationale of taking this 15 days? I also understand that event study is kind of very, short-term study, but then also if they can have some reasoning why this 15 days, that would be great to see. And my suggestion is to take like not, 15 days, but an average of, because this announcement had already taken place around like more than 1.5 years back. So they can also have this, this analysis period by month, and then they can, since they have enough time to update this, so they can also consider this, this medium term impact. The second thing is the paper has highlighted the very recent paper, which is very similar to what they have done. So it would also be interesting to see that how this paper is different from Alan Hay. And because that paper has taken around 200 companies. So my question is, do these companies are part of that? Are these the subsample of those that paper? So if it is always good to highlight how this is different from that paper. My third point is, what explains the difference in your finding across companies? Since these 12 companies, most of them are from infrastructure companies like iron and steel, and then there are companies related to pharmaceuticals, and there are companies like Tata, I think Tata Motors. So how, if you have some kind of control for what sector do they represent, then it would be easy to explain, and then there will be policy implications at macro level from where we as a central banker can also learn. So that would be very interesting to see in this paper. I would also suggest that the paper by Pingling et al. So this they have seen this kind of regression-based model with additional explanatory variables. So this point covers my two earlier points, how to make this paper different from and come up with more, practical policy implications. So I would suggest to have a broader framework with more additional explanatory variables that could be based on location and sector, and then come up with some policy implication across sectors. And the next point is how this study in this study how the shareholding patterns is it is differentiated. So there was explanation, but you need to elaborate it furthermore. So what I mean is that what is the frequency of data, how the data looks like. So maybe a summary table would be nice to go through the paper and understand the broad scenario. So my very larger, very broad comments would be to just to make the to increase the readability of the paper is to rearranging the fact with more visual tools for explaining some stylized fact about these firms and what they're, and more elaborating more on how they are going to, transit toward net zero targets. And and I also saw that this paper can add more on more literature on efficient market hypothesis and green transition. So this is I think it's a very very new area. They do not have much paper on this, but it would be a very good addition to this paper. So basically how this efficient market hypothesis is affected through green transition. I mean, some minor comments are improving the alignment between research findings and abstract, because initially I got confused about numbers of, numbers of companies studied. So that there should be a clarity. And there should be uniform citation style, and adding more economic implications. That I think that paper is has to scope to improve. So they can how these numbers which you have found that after day 2 this there was a significant increase in stock prices. So how this what would be the implication? Because on the day 1st it is increasing, day 4th it is decreasing, then what is the economic implications? So I mean that would be a very good addition. And also I would like to see some robustness of results, because you have like very much variation across firms, across companies. So that kind of explanation or test that can prove your robustness of the results, that would be great to see. That's all I had to say. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ranjita. And so we have a few questions in the chat, which I'll just read out, and then Kruti, please respond to whichever comments from Ranjita and in the Q&A you feel like. One question is, does the report attribute all the change in the price of the stock in BSE on the days post the event to be because of the event? Then there is a question, is the sample size enough to conduct this analysis? How are the companies lagging behind in terms of fulfilling their commitments? Are there incentives or subsidies for companies in India committing towards government's net zero goal? And then a final comment, hope there can be a link analysis between short-term and long-term benefit, or in other words, you may analyze in days, weeks, months, quarters, and years. How people may focus on both short-term influence and long-term influence, but I'm also concerned about data mining bias, and you need to balance. So it's just a suggestion. You have around 5 minutes, Kruti, to respond to Ranjita's points and also some of the points made in the chat. Over to you. Thank you.
Sure. I think I'll start with Ms. Ranjita's points. Thank you very much for your feedback. We'll try to incorporate as many suggestions as possible. We'll do all the suggestions. But two things. We have taken 15 days before and on the event, before the event days, in event day, and 15 days after the event days. So I think it gets 31 days. I'm not sure if that is sufficient, or we will go back to like 30 days before the event, and that's how we come to 45 days. So that becomes a reasonably long period, as you suggested. How it is different from the paper, which Mr. Hayes' paper, right? So one thing, they have taken companies which have committed to SBTI, Science-Based Target Initiative. They have done research on that, and they have taken companies from world over. These companies are specifically from who are from Indian only, and they may not have agreed to science-based targets, or they have not registered for them. That's the difference, main difference between what kind of companies. Like, these are not the exact subsets of the companies which they have considered. Yes, I've taken inspiration from them, and yes, what the kind of methodology they have followed, that's what I have tried to take inspiration from. So that is at the world level. Companies which have done SBTI, we are only in the India, so that's the biggest difference, and the subset, it's not there. That's what one thing. Second thing, when it When it comes to individual sectors, you said that it would be a good idea. Yes, we would like to do that. Only one thing which we get stuck in this, we wanted to do it, but we could not do it because that there are the companies who have agreed for this particular thing are from the different sectors. The moment I get into the sector, I have to go for there is another equation which even consider that particular sector's rates as well. I have forgotten the name of that particular method, but we tried doing it, and then I had to step back because I could not do it for all five sectors of or all the sectors which we have covered companies in this particular paper. Apart from that, we will include other comments which you have given, like regression based model, that thing which I have explained you, findings across the companies, and the way you said that there are adding more economic implications would make it better. We'll try and incorporate all the comments which you have given, and thank you very much for giving us such insightful comments. There's a one thing, shareholding pattern frequency. It is as per SEBI, Securities and Exchange Board of India guidelines. It's happening every 3 months. So quarterly submission you have to do. We have picked up shareholding pattern from that particular source. So that is how it's being done. Apart from that, I think I've got almost all the comments from Ms. Ranjita. There were some minor comments which she suggested. Yes, we'll try and do this minor changes up and down here. So that's all for Ms. Ranjita's comments.
Thank you so much, Kruti. So maybe you could answer some of the questions in the chat directly in the chat, because we've come to the end of this paper slot. So welcome back, everyone. We're now progressing to the third paper of this session. We already had 2 excellent paper presentations, and it's my pleasure to invite Hendro Nugroho from the Ministry of Finance of the Republic of Indonesia to present his work on government guarantees in the public-private partnership infrastructure development of the energy transition mechanism. Hendro, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Ulrich. Let me share my screen first. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Let me introduce myself. My name is Hendro. I am from Indonesia. I work for Ministry of Finance and I'm responsible to manage government investment in Indonesia. Today, I'm very pleased to be here and I would like to present my research. The title of my research is Government Guarantee in the Public-Private Partnership Infrastructure Development of the Energy Transition Mechanism. I have divided my presentation into 6 parts. Firstly, background of the research. Secondly, theoretical framework. The next, government guarantee and public-private partnership on energy infrastructure development. Transition finance, financing renewable energy and energy infrastructure development, and finally, conclusion. First of all, I want to discuss about my research background. My research motivation began from the energy transition mechanism in Indonesia that a cross-ministerial program has a number of additional implementation strategies. This program is carried out by the Ministry of Finance under the country platform mechanism, a framework mechanism created to promote collaboration among development partners in order to provide financial support for ETM programs. In order to support the reduction of gas emission in the energy sector, particularly the power generation subsector, ETM is a type of financing scheme that aims to hasten the termination of high emission operation at thermal power plants. The government has prepared an ETM country platform which can be used as funding and financing framework for carrying out an energy transition. To support the implementation of the ETM, it's hoped that ETM country platform will help to advance funding and financing of the green energy transition toward net zero emission. Now let's move on the next slide about my theoretical framework. Firstly, one of the ministry special mission vehicle was given the text of managing the funding and financing framework for accelerating the energy transition in the electricity sector. The energy transition program is not just focused on ETM. The government is still working to create a sustainable economic system. For instance, the government encourages the development and production of electric vehicle, opens the opportunity for collaboration in the battery industry, and promotes the growth of green industry, like the solar panel industry for solar power plants. And by making this effort, a green economy ecosystem will develop more quickly. And then the government still making an effort to control the harmful effect of the energy transition program. The main player is in preserving public service and price stability will be the government. The administration will push for the energy transition to always follow the tenet of just and affordable. The availability of assistance for impacted parties, particularly micro, small, and medium-sized businesses, can be characterized as the just principle. And then tax breaks for participants in the green economy and encouragement of the certainty of shifting human resource to the green economy are two examples of this kind of support. The concept of affordable can be defined as the government acting actively to preserve the general populace purchasing power when determining adjustment to energy price. And then ETM was established with the goals of expediting the electricity steam power plant project, obtaining additional gas emission reduction, and obtaining cheaper funding as a response to these difficulties. The preparation of the financing mechanism is the primary focus of ETM development during this phase. The next point I would like to talk is the government role in ETM programs. Firstly, increasing the burden subsidies. An example of government provided addition to the basic provision cost is electricity subsidies. Electricity subsidy has several cost components, including depreciation and electricity purchase costs. The burden of the electricity subsidies increases as a result of the increase in depreciation costs in alternative ETM. Secondly, the capacity support for SOE. The Indonesian Ministry of Finance oversees the state-owned enterprises and special mission vehicle known as PTSME. The country performance is overseen by PTSME. However, PTSME has a performance that needs to be upheld. Given the high investment costs involved in building electric steam power plant asset, SOE needs to be adequately backed by equity. And then SOE still has obligation outside the country platform. It is necessary to provide capital in the form of cash or direct capital injection from the government in order to grant an assignment as the manager of the country platform. Thirdly, the government guaranteeing support. The country platform needs to have access to affordable financing, whether or not there are any government guarantees. This ETM will increase the financial burden associated with guarantee, including the needs to provide guarantee reserve funds if the intended low-cost financing requires government support. Let me move to the next slide about government guarantee and public-private partnership on energy infrastructure development. We have PT Penjaminan Infrastruktur Indonesia or PTPII, state-owned enterprise and special mission vehicle run by the Indonesian Ministry of Finance, that some of the various entities with government guarantees that can be used to build ETM infrastructure in Indonesia. This is assigned as a single window service for evaluating, creating guarantee structures, and providing guarantee for infrastructure project with PPP schemes. A form of government assistance known as infrastructure guaranteeing through PEE gives the private sector assurance that the cooperation project responsible party will fulfill its financial obligation under PPP agreement. By improving the creditworthiness or bankability of PPP project while maintaining the government's interest, particularly in relation to any contingent obligation that might arise from the government. PEE is anticipated to increase certainty in obtaining project financing. And then PEE has been built with the public-private partnership scheme to strengthen public-private partnership bridge in infrastructure. Since its founding, PEE has expanded its mandate to guarantee non-PPP projects and project assistance from the planning stage to the implementation of transaction, which has increases its role in assisting the acceleration of infrastructure development. The government has continued to prioritize infrastructure since 2016. The support of essential services, economic growth, and urban development is given to top priority in Indonesia infrastructure development. This primary focus will be supported by the advance of energy and electricity, as well as the adoption of digital transformation. The development of infrastructure for the years 2020 to 2024 will also take into account a number of major factors, including sustainable development objective, digital transformation, and social capital. Creative initiatives are required to promote community and business entity participation, primarily through the PPP scheme. However, due to ongoing support for infrastructure spending, particularly for national strategic projects and new investment amid a favorable investment climate, the investment is anticipated to increase. Now let's move on the next slide about transition finance. PAI has two strategies to manage the government equity injection in the framework of guarantee, namely through the re-guarantee and co-guarantee schemes based on benchmarking that has been done. The guarantee is guarantee strategy in which PAI assigns the accumulated risk exposure in its guarantee portfolio to a single or a collection assurance firms. In exchange for reducing risk, PAI makes premium payment proportionate to the risk transfers to reinsurer. The guarantee and guarantee party agreement will only involve PAI, and the reinsurance agreement with the reinsurance partner will be carried out independently of the guarantee agreement. Therefore, even though the claim payment include a portion of claim payment from the insurance partner to the guarantor, the guaranteed party will still receive the full amount of claim payments from PAI in the event of default, because there is only one guarantee agreement between the guarantor and the guaranteed party. The re-guarantee scheme completely eliminated the risk relation of control. This is not the case if there are two or more guarantors who provide the guarantee and have different appetites for risk in underwriting and operation. PAI will encounter a number of difficulties despite the benefits of the re-guarantee scheme. The first difficulty is determining the maximum level of risk exposure. And when the main guarantor is aware the risk to be assumed is getting close to the maximum limit, the re-guarantee will function best. The process of risk sharing with the guarantor partner starts when it approaches this threshold. In order to cooperation to be mutual, PAI must also be able to determine the appropriate pricing for guarantor partners. The PAI scheme is a joint guarantee in addition to the re-guarantee. In contrast to the re-guarantee method, the co-guarantee scheme requires prior agreement between the main guarantor, co-guarantor, and the guaranteed party. With the co-guarantee scheme, PAI has the freedom to decide which projects need it and which can be guaranteed independently from the start. The co-guarantee method used by PAI involves paying the primary guarantee directly, the guarantor partner, and PAI came to an advance agreement. The guaranteed party pays PAI in full, and PAI then distribute the money to the guarantor partner. Now let's consider about financing energy and energy infrastructure development. Firstly, the government is committed to ensuring that infrastructure risks that the private sector cannot manage with effective risk allocation are covered. This indicates that existence of measurable and reasonable guarantee mechanism aims at the sustainability of public finance. Guarantee based on risk allocation by considering which party is best able to manage this risk can prevent direct exposure to government budget, fall or risk of exciting infrastructure project, and maintain the sustainability of the government budget. Secondly, PAI is expected to encourage the flow of funds from the private sector to infrastructure sector in Indonesia by increasing the credit worthiness of PPP projects, which can have an impact on reducing the cost of financing infrastructure project. For the government as the project owner, the guarantee can increase the certainty of private participation in and financing of Indonesia infrastructure development. PAI can also assist the government by creating some business structure that increase the security of successful investor transaction, leading to quality assurance and efficient infrastructure development. The situation in the renewable energy market in Indonesia is very difficult, and I think there is also various constraints in this area. In the next phase, bigger and more efficient innovation are needed to meet the huge investment need of the electricity industry in the coming decades. The proposed solution is based on energy resilience funds, which consists of three separated financial windows: a availability gap fund, a project development fund, and a credit enhancement fund. However, at this stage, the proposal should be treated as a possible alternative. Other types of funding measure may be appropriate, or the proposed action may be implemented differently than those suggested. The renewable energy sector will need support from the private sector for investment needs around 316 trillion in 2030, of which 6% will be funded through green bond to target foreign and private investors who have a higher appetite for green investing. The construction sector will also need an investment of 3,900 trillion by 2030 to meet the target and environmentally friendly development and public transport of around 289 trillion in 2030. Even though energy sources are currently still dominated by fossil fuels, the development of renewable energy source is expected to increase. This increase is in line with the government target of achieving a renewable energy composition target up to 23%. That completes my presentation. In conclusions, my research have policy recommendation that ETM is a form of a financing scheme to accelerate the termination of high emission electricity steam or plant operation, and to open up new investment in clean energy so that it can support the reduction of gas emission in the energy sector, especially the power generation subsector. ETM covers two schemes: the carbon reduction facility and the clean energy facility. Secondly, in developing ETM through funding and financing, the Indonesian Ministry of Finance assigned the Ministry Special Mission Vehicle to become the guarantor and manager of the funding and financing framework for accelerating the energy transition in the electricity sector in the context of providing fiscal support. As a guarantor and special mission vehicle, PAE employs two methods to support ETM achievement that are re-guarantee and co-guarantee. Both schemes have advantage and disadvantage in guaranteeing infrastructure development and realizing ETM in Indonesia. Lastly, for the government as the project onward, the guarantee can increase the certainty of private participation in and financing of Indonesia infrastructure development. PAE can also assist the government by creating sound business structure that increase the security of successful investor transaction, leading to quality assurance and efficient infrastructure development in the private sector. Guarantee can also reduce political risk of the investor and creditor. That concludes my presentation. I know if there's any question, I will be able to answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hendro, for outlining what the Indonesian government has been trying to do to foster PPPs in infrastructure development. And now I'd like to invite Tang Do, who's the fellow in the Zero Carbon Energy for Asia Pacific Grand Challenge Program at the Crawford School of Public Policy at ANU, to deliver his comments. Tang, the floor is yours. But you're mute, it seems. At least I can't hear you. I can't hear you. I don't know. You don't seem to be mute, but there seems to be a problem with the microphone.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, now it works. Wonderful.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. So thank you, presenter. Through your presentation, I have a better understanding about the paper. But as a discussion, I still would like to contribute some comments in order to improve the paper. And my comment will mainly based on the paper that I had a chance to read. Just want to move this one. here we go. So the key points of the paper recommends government guarantee for energy transition infrastructure, PPP projects in Indonesia. And although not very clearly stated in the paper, the methods seem to have included reviewing government documents and previous studies. And the key message is that government guarantee can increase certainty of private participation in and financing of ETM infrastructure development. And also it can reduce financial cost of the investment. So the message is clearly stated, especially in conclusion. The topic of the paper, I found it is quite interesting and policy relevant because the ETM and also recently Indonesia joined the Just Energy Transition Partnership, the JP. So it's very relevant to raise the question of how can the government or how can Indonesia increase the private sector involvement in such a ambitious mechanism. The conclusion, the message is clear, and the paper provides quite detailed information on policy and document from governments. I also have some perhaps suggestions. First of all, I think that would be clearer for the readers if the authors state the objectives of the paper more clearly. For example, you may want to consider having a research question. It could be what or how could Indonesia increase private sector involvement in energy transition, for example. So we will have a better understanding of what the issue you want to address is. Second, I would suggest add subheadings in all the sessions. In the presentation, you have subheading, but in the paper, no subheadings. So for example, in the transition finance, as you presented just now, perhaps it could be divided into guarantee and co-guarantee, and then you may want to discuss pros and cons. So we have understanding of, pros and cons of each scheme. One important point is that it would be better to clarify what has happened and what should happen. In the presentation, you mentioned that Indonesia government has established some mechanism, but somehow it's unclear to me when reading the paper what has happened and what should happen, what you want to recommend to happen to improve the situation, for example. And also in the paper, I would like to see more explanation of why you said so or why you recommend so. And I would like to see more evidence. Why you say that it would work from Indonesian experience, from other countries' experience. Okay. So more evidence, more explanation. And for example, in the financing for renewable energy and energy infrastructure development, I would like to suggest that perhaps you want to rearrange the flow of argument a bit. Right now, I found the argument is loosely connected. So, for example, you can start by introduce why the private sector participation is needed in the ETM and how guarantee can increase the certainty of private participation. Provide examples, evidence in Indonesia and in other countries. And discuss why more clearly. In the presentation you did, right? But in the paper, perhaps you would like to discuss why Indonesia should apply guarantee and what should be done to strengthen. What has been done may not be enough. And you may want to point out what should be done to strengthen the current mechanism. And focus more on the energy infrastructure development so that the link between ETM and the current mechanism can be strengthened. Some more suggestions, and they are quite minor. For example, merging the theoretical framework to introduction, because the theoretical framework section now I don't think that it's quite theory. It's more like introduction, and also clarify the links between the entities. For example, ETM country platform and the PT PII, and also clarify the entities' mandates. Explain all the abbreviations, add the US dollars equivalent. So the readers outside of Indonesia can have a better understanding, and provide more references and improve the readability. So overall, I think that the paper is interesting and contains useful information, but it would be much clearer if you could do some more work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Thang. And anyone who'd like to post some questions or comments, please use the Q&A function. And in the meantime, let me ask Hendro to respond to the comments you just heard.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Thang. Thank you for your great comment and suggestion. I think it's all clear, and I will consider your comment. I have write down and I will revise my paper. I think it's a great idea to consider the things that you suggest, to consider why this happened and what should happen. I think I will make it's more clearly on my paper about how the PAE invites the investor and the investment come to Indonesia to provide the government infrastructure to and guaranteeing projects. I will make more clearly in my paper, and I think I will make some major revision. Anyway, thank you very much. I think enough.
Thanks, Hendro. We have a question from Naufal in the Q&A chat. Hi, thanks for the presentation. With regards to the guarantee for energy transition and renewable energy projects, I should suggest to explore type of guarantee, e.g. credit guarantee, political guarantee, etc., and consider also comparison with other typical guarantee instruments applicable in other countries, e.g. MY Dana Jamin in the Philippines. So far, Indonesia has not applied any guarantee in renewable energy financing. Would you like to respond to this?
I have notes that I will consider that Dana Jamin in Malaysia, I think, and I will. Yes, I have notes to. Maybe I will compare with Dana Jamin in Malaysia. Thank you.
All right, good. I mean, if I may add to Thang's comments, I think given that the paper is promoting public-private partnerships in infrastructure, I think it would be important to have a more extensive analysis of the empirical evidence regarding previous successes or failures regarding PPPs in Indonesia, but also more broadly, because the track record is not that great throughout. So of course there have been some successes, but there's also quite a bit of not so great examples of public-private partnerships in infrastructure development. So I think having a kind of more fundamental discussion about the merits and problems of such approaches would be important, I think. And also, I would love to see more detail on the potential guarantee schemes that you'd like to promote, because you need to, I mean, the devil, as always, is in the detail, and again, you can have guarantee mechanisms that are very useful in stimulating certain kinds of investments, but also you don't want to shift all the risk to the public balance sheet and just guarantee private returns. So I think one has to be very careful in balancing this out, and I think this would be important to be discussed in the paper. And there is a great emerging literature, not emerging, but great expanding literature on around these issues, and that I think you should include in your analysis.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right, good. Unless there are any further questions, I would close this session now. We're a little bit ahead of time, but that's not a bad thing. So thank you very much, Hendro and Tang, for interesting discussion. And then let's move on to the last paper of this session, and indeed this first conference day. And I'd like to invite my old friend Kim Schumacher, who is an associate professor at Kyushu University Institute for Asian Oceanian Studies, and he will present on ESG in Japan, exploration of risks and opportunities in the startup investment and venture capital sectors. So Kim, over to you.
Thank you very much, Uli. Thank you very much, and great to be here again and hopefully provide some insights on what is going on in this area in Asia, more particularly also especially in Japan. So I would like to start with so the title of the presentation today is ESG in Japan, exploration of risks and opportunities in the startup investment and venture capital sectors. So as an introduction, first, I would like to frame it in the sense that global venture capital activity has been expanding rapidly over the past decades, but especially even throughout COVID, with the emergence of new solutions, especially in the IT sector, and other innovations around adapting to life during the pandemic. We've seen a lot of capital flowing into that area, and especially also in Asia in recent years, it has been expanding. So we see that there has been quite significant activity in the innovation space in Asia, globally, but especially also in Asia. And that leads me to talking about ESG. So most of you might be familiar with it. It's centered around factors, metrics, and indicators that are situated within the environmental, social, and governance areas. For environment, most notably greenhouse gas emissions, water management or circular economy, and then for social, health and safety, working conditions, human rights, some of those which are very notable. And then for governance, ethical standards, board diversity and governance, for example, in terms of corruption or executive pay, shareholder rights, so stakeholder engagement. So those are the things that we are talking about when we think about integrating ESG factors into investment decision-making, either to seek opportunities or to manage risks. And that is at the core of what we try to find out moving forward, because we've seen also global sustainable investing has been growing rapidly in recent years. This is, for example, from UNCTAD. They monitor, and between 2010 and 2020, we've seen the number steadily rising, and especially in 2019, 2020, there's a significant jump. And even in 2021, there has already been also indications that it was significantly rising 2022 as well, even though in recently sustainable investing has also come a little bit under fire, especially at the political front in the United States. But other than that, it has been a steady rise. And with that growth in the venture capital space and in the sustainable investment space, there was not, of course, the logical consequence to know what is the situation in Japan. So what do especially startups, what do they understand under ESG? Do they actually know what it means? And is there any awareness around it? Because contrary to what happens in Europe or in the United States, the discussion here does happen around ESG and sustainable investing. However, that is more at the top regulatory level, at the political level, large listed companies. But usually if you go further down, there's much less awareness around these issues. But why do we do that even? So why is it even something that we would consider? Because companies, there's studies around that says that companies which do integrate ESG, they show an outperformance, a financial and superior financial performance. For example, this paper from 2015, one of the most cited ESG papers that is currently out there in the area of ESG, shows that ultimately integrating ESG can be of benefit for firms that do it. So one would think that startups or startups innovate in the innovation space, those who want to grow, those who want to attract capital, since we see these studies or these empirical studies, this empirical evidence that apparently shows that integrating ESG does lead to superior financial returns. That could be a catalyst also for startups to consider ESG factors more in their daily business and in how they, in their business models, but also in their daily governance moving forward. And there has already been some research in this space. So the European Investment Fund conducted a study, a series of studies, and in a working paper from 2020, they looked at especially ESG considerations in venture capital and business angel investment decisions. And this focused primarily on Europe. But what they did find is that in Europe, there's already quite an, how do I say it, an awareness around it. And even to what extent already ESG factors are being considered when making investment decisions, either venture capital, incubators, angel investors. There seems to already be some awareness, and that also seems to be already to various degrees being integrated. And here we see why. What are the main motivations to do it? It is in terms of, for example, negative screening, for example, excluding certain sectors, such as gambling, tobacco is one very common one, weapons. So these are mainly meant for risk management, or, for example, from larger institutional investors, they're being asked a reputational signal also to improve reputation, or positive screening is investment performance seems to be positive or outperform certain other sectors. So there's a variety of reasons in order why it would be integrated. But we see the main reason that we see is that there is already a certain awareness, and there's already ESG engagement, either in forms of negative screening, so excluding certain sectors, or positive screening, including certain sectors, especially, for example, renewables, impact investing, so making investments where you want to see a very concrete impacts, often with a form of concessional finance, so expecting returns that are slightly below market rate, or active ownership trying to steer companies in a direction that is more ESG aligned, more sustainability aligned, ideally. through, for example, shareholder resolutions or just active engagement, or full integration into valuation. So ESG factors such as, for example, bad scores in terms of human rights, they would be included in the valuation. So in Europe, we already see that, but we wanted to look at what is happening in Japan as partially representative of East Asia, of Asia. And we went ahead, we created a survey that consisted both of a questionnaire and complementary in-depth reviews with 2 firms. So the questionnaire was addressed to 43 startup companies of an actual Tokyo-based VC fund, which consists of 39 investee companies and 4 companies which received incubation support, to identify the startup management's general perception on ESG related issues. And the overall structure of the questionnaire referenced the CDP, the Carbon Disclosure Project's climate questionnaire, which provides questions and multiple choice answers covering several key areas. So it took that as an inspiration, especially around climate issues. But since the CDP questionnaire started mostly as a climate-related questionnaire, but recently expanded it onto other ESG issues, notably water stress or human rights, that seemed an adequate source or inspiration for structuring our questionnaire as well. And it's one of the most applied, especially for large listed, but also for medium-sized companies. And recently, even some small companies do respond to the CDP questionnaire. So it seemed adequate. In terms of response rate, a total of 37 firms across different sectors and industries did eventually respond to the questionnaire. And based on the SASB materiality map, these firms could largely be categorized in 5 different sectors, which are shown in different colors in figure 2, which we will show later on. So here's just one more time as a summary, the survey that we conducted. So the questionnaire, 39 firms, and 4 firms more at the incubator stage level, and then interview with 1 service sector-based firm and 1 technology sector-based firm. Then what did we ask? Sections of the questionnaire. So basic information about the organization, then awareness of ESG and sustainable development concepts, then the management process. So especially for those that did know about ESG, to what extent did they integrate it? Then business strategies. So how did they further try to integrate it into their entire governance and moving forward? Would they likely expand it, or would they take it up, especially for those that did not integrate it prior or had not a large awareness around it? And then just additional comments and explanations for those that wanted to provide additional feedback or wanted to explain some of their answers. The challenges faced by startups. So based on that, we also looked particularly at different elements. We looked at the capacity, the strategy, and the scale. So because we thought startups are in a unique situation, different from like large listed companies, that one of the things is beyond strategy and beyond capacities, for example, at the management level or at the governance level, is also scale. And that is something that is very unique for startups, because startups also need to respond to pressures in terms of gaining scale in a short amount of time due to investor level expectations, especially angel investors or incubators. They expect returns quite in a short-term timeline. So, and that is what makes ESG integration at the startup level so difficult, because for large companies, they have already established supply chains. They already have activities, sometimes even international branches, subsidiaries. And with that comes already an awareness, increased resources, increased capacities to implement ESG considerations into corporate decision making, but also for large investors to consider it. But at the startup level, the further we go down, scale becomes one of the key elements, because you need to grow very quickly at a rapid pace in order to gain a significant substantial size. And that was something that we particularly wanted to identify through the questionnaire as well, is what we call the triple materiality concept. So you first have the financial materiality, is business need to generate revenues, financial revenues, but also the ESG aspect, the environmental and the social materiality, and often those two are called double materiality. And then we introduced something, what we call the triple materiality concept, is proportional materiality, because companies in this space, they struggle in various aspects. Because first of all, due to the size, reduced capacities, they do not have large legal departments or large sustainability departments. Then also in terms of establishing a strategy, they also need to be very focused on responding to investor expectations. And for example, through different seed rounds, they need to take consideration of that primarily. And then the most important one would be scale. They need to rapidly expand. And that is something that is very unique. And we called it proportional materiality, because it really is in terms of capacities, in terms of strategy, but especially in terms of scale, they need to grow. And with that, environmental and social materiality, financial materiality sometimes could work one against the other, because if you look more at financial returns because you need to grow, then maybe environmental social materiality, especially in the startup space, might take be of secondary importance. But as we saw with ESG integration, it might actually also give you advantages. So that is a delicate balance to strike. The results of our questionnaire. So what we found is the materiality of industries of each firm is, so for example, how high was ESG considered relevant in different, across different industries. And we found, for example, for software and IT and technology and pharmaceuticals, it was extremely high. And that also because a lot of funds that try to reduce carbon emissions or try to improve, for example, create a social impact, a lot of even large institutional investors gravitate towards those sectors because usually it allows them to reduce their carbon footprints fairly easily, because usually there's less carbon exposure at for software, for IT, in the IT sectors. And then also biotechnology and pharmaceuticals, healthcare, developing drug development, that as we saw with COVID, that is also an easy way of making a direct impact, for example, in the social space. And that is how you can usually fulfill ESG considerations fairly easily. And that is also why there's already more awareness, and also those industries consider it more material for themselves. Then, are you aware of sustainability concepts? And then a lot of them are familiar with SDGs, with some have heard of ESG, very few have heard of TCFD, the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosure. Some have heard, like roughly 1/3 has heard of greenwashing. And then those were not, they were like, yeah, not sure of answers. And then a lot of them like, yeah, no ESG, so just as either yes or no. And we see especially SDGs, but if it comes to very specific ESG concepts like TCFD, like sustainability reporting or climate-related risk reporting, awareness is much lower. That is a little bit the opposite of like large listed companies in Japan, where TCFD is a very known term, and also some companies already publish TCFD reports. Then how important will ESG strategies become for your business in the next 2 years? Some say very, but medium is roughly half or a little bit less than half. And then low uncertain also at least more than 1/3 says they do not expect it to be important, at least not in the near future. Then does your business have sustainability, SDG, ESG related policies in place? And yes, there's none. So that was something that is quite striking. None of them has that. So it is very striking to see that they yet in that space. A lot of companies, they did not explicitly do it, and some of them, as we found in the interviews, they did once we explained to them what ESG actually is, and then it was kind of like a eureka moment. Oh yeah, we did actually have such policies. So it's quite important to how much awareness plays a role. Then are ESG criteria considered during your ESG business decision process? And the overwhelming majority says no. Then here it is important to know that ESG criteria, that would be, for example, carbon emissions. So even if they do not have specific strategies targeting sustainability or SDGs, some of them did actually address, for example, carbon emissions or waste, or for example, social aspects. And that is what this means. So some of them are playing a role, but even if there's no explicit strategy, then motivations for considering ESG criteria when making business decisions moving forward would be the stakeholder demand, the risk management, the positive reputation, ethics and social responsibility being the largest. In Japan, I see some of you also wearing your SDG pins. So in Japan, there's a large movement around the SDGs and showing your alignment with sustainable development principles and with the SDGs. So that would be, and that also does align with general trends in Japan. Then change in business practice in industry. So some do realize that industries are changing. For example, the digital transformation creates new opportunities, for example, in reducing carbon emissions, because certain services can now be offered remotely. So those are some of the things that were taken into account. Then reasons for not considering ESG criteria when making business decisions. Then very few considered not important for risk management, but they also said it is a low investment priority. So right now, scaling and with the core business model, expanding the core business model and solidifying that is of higher priority than also looking at ESG criteria and then describing those, for example, rather focusing on the core activities. And then, which was very striking, was limited resource and expertise. So a lot of them, they do not have a facility officer, they do not have a legal department that might be aware of, for example, larger scale regulatory movements or developments. And that is very important, why it is currently not of a priority, and it's currently not done at such a high rate. And then a very important element is also, and I think it's linked to limited resource and expertise, is difficult to quantify ESG information and difficult to assess ESG information. So either they're not subscribed to external ESG data services or service providers like ESG ratings and scores. Most of them are not. And then also difficult to access ESG information. Some of them are not even aware what ESG information actually pertains to. And then also, where can we find it? What do we do with it when we have it? So those are all considerations that currently as a barrier to more ESG integration, notably the capacities, but also the awareness around it. Then the biggest challenge in running the business would be number of high quality entrepreneurs, small fund sizes. So funds sizes, especially in Japan, can sometimes be very small compared to what is happening in Europe and happening in the United States. The market volatility, and then it is linked to small fund size. It would be fundraising. That is something extremely important. And then fee pressure is responding to investor expectations. When you do have funding, then responding to that. and then basically accessing new funds through, for example, fundraising, additional seed fund rounds, that is sometimes extremely difficult. So, and this goes to the scaling aspect. So when you have these things already to deal with, that might be one of the key factors why ESG might not be a priority, or even they might, sustainability more in general is not necessarily a priority right now, because they're basically busy with day-to-day business and scaling their businesses to achieve a critical size. And that is probably one of the key reasons as well, what we explained in the triple materiality.
Kim, you have around 3 minutes left.
Okay, I'm almost done. So the survey has shown that the startups are struggling within the triangle of barriers. So like the triple materiality element, the barriers are interacting. So providing solutions to one barrier would not be sufficient. And all of these barriers, so the triple materiality concept needs to be addressed in order to make ESG integration or promote ESG integration among startups, especially in Japan. Then, as the first attempt to analyze, this was the first attempt to analyze startup management's perspective of ESG standards. The research could be developed into several areas for future study. For the future study of this report, the sample size of the startups could be increased. This report has surveyed 37 Tokyo VC investee firms, theorized in triangle of barriers for ESG implementation based on their respective answers. A large sample size and from different countries would provide more robust empirical evidence. So if we have more, especially in Asian countries, including, like, for example, Korea and Southeast Asia, would provide much more contextuality. Then increased competitiveness for fund, global and Asia-based institutional investors are increasingly expecting ESG practices, for example, the GPIF in Japan. And then with that, also those who have to get funding from the GPIF or through the GPIF asset managers, they would need to respond to that as well. So it does make sense, and responding to this trend would be laudable. Then VC investments, VC firms with robust ESG practice could especially attract more investors, especially broader, not also outside of Japan. So it does offer opportunities, but the risks, especially in terms of scale, are significant. And then performance, there's little awareness currently among startups of firm level ESG integration, and they also do not perceive it necessarily as outperforming. So they rather see it as a risk due to limited resources. And especially in Japan, currently VC firms are not sufficiently aware, and they need additional support and subject matter expertise from governments, external experts, and framework organizations. So I thank you. I was a bit rushed at the end, but I do hope you got the gist of what we wanted to communicate in our paper. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to both the feedback from the fellow readers and from the audience.
Thank you so much, Kim, for a very insightful presentation. And I hand over to the discussants, and that is Sahar Wahdati, who's a senior lecturer in accounting and the finance department at the Othman Yob Abdullah Graduate School of Business at University of Utara, Malaysia. Over to you, Sahar, and thanks for joining.
Thank you so much for, first of all, inviting me to be in this conference, and thank you so much for Dr. Kim for the nice paper and topic that you have just presented. Let me just share my slides. All right, can you see my slides?
Yes, we can.
Okay, that's good. So
can you do full screen, please? Yeah, wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah. I'm going to just give you a very short, back review of whatever Kim just mentioned, and give my own comments. And I hope that the comments can help you prepare for improvement and for further publications. All right, what I'm going to discuss in this presentation is that a brief review of the research paper and a bit research gaps of what is happening, the methodology that the authors used, their results and conclusion, and I will highlight of the study and just comments, areas of my concerns. All right, as know that this paper is very interesting topic, and it's mostly based on what I have found. It's wants to see that show the interest of the investors in the ESG investment, especially in the VC sector. That the authors wants to mention that the paper has been there is still small share of the firms that shows that this improvement happens, although the number is improving. In Japan also is important because the huge number of the investors look at the ESG these days. So as a whole, the aim of the study is to examine the startup management. Let me just close this section. I don't know how to, I have a big view. So, okay. This paper, the startup management perspective about the standard and the key barriers that happens for the ESG integrating into the business strategy. What I can see in the literature review, the authors see the VC investment from that factors that influencing VC, and also they found that some explanations about the sustainable development and influencing VC startups. So the factors they have just discussed is around two areas, internal and the external. And the methodology that they have used is that interview and the structured questionnaire. The sample size for the questionnaire is 43 and 2 for their interviews. And they have divided in the 5 sessions with the 36 questions. The most important findings of this paper is that there is a theory development actually after the questionnaire and interview, and they highlighted 3 important challenges that have been faced in their questionnaire and interviews, and then so we can call it the theory development. So what is the highlight of this study is that it's a very up-to-date topic, and still, and because in the Japan also there is lack of research in this area. The introduction is explained clearly. This is a mixed method research and based on the VC of the startup of Japanese company. And this is a developed-based theory based on their findings, and the references are relevant. However, I have some concerns in different parts. In the introduction, although it's nicely written, but it is what I found is a bit general. I mean that there is no specific explanation, justification from the reason of using Japan for this study, because the title of the study is related to Japan. So there is a very nice explanations, huge and expansive explanations about the worldwide. But what I found that it is needs more further discussion in this section. And in my opinion, it is suggested that researchers use the clear research questions because when they use the mixed method means that they normally in the mixed method, we have both quantitative and qualitative research. So research objectives can be okay, but it is better to have the research question as well. And since the perspective, the sample of the participants is managers, right? So better to start writing the introduction and also on from the perspective of the management. I saw, but it is, I think, needs to be highlighted more. And although the references are relevant, but I found it's not still enough, because many of the explanations that the researchers mentioned is without any citations and references. And I think that for having a very good publication, you need to, that work more in these sites. Contribution is okay, but I found it still needs to work, because there are many things that you can write about the novelty of this research. And I saw that that authors use from the first, without the full letter explanations, the acronyms. So I suggest that the first once they just write it as a whole, and then start to use acronyms, because some that do not have any knowledge about that topic, then it can be helpful. All right, about the literature review section. Still, I think that, as I mentioned earlier, the literature is discussed in two factors. That factors influencing the VC and also sustainable development. However, still, I feel that it is needed to be more from the perspective of Japanese companies. And also the reference needs to be, written, more justifications and so on. And this is the mixed method. And based on my understanding, it should be theory development and theory, theory testing and theory development, right? So what is that? At least we need some background theories from like stakeholder theory and some other theories that support some parts of your research, that you have many, that good explanations, but it is, that much more better that you can add it with your hypothesis, with their theories. And I'm not still sure that this is the empirical paper. We can categorize it as an empirical paper or descriptive paper. But since it is written, it is a mixed method. So I suggest that use, if there is special variables just mentioned, I can not see there is any relationship in this paper. So, but maybe have more explanations about the way of using questionnaire, because when mostly we use questionnaire in quantitative, there should be some variables. And I'm not sure here what are the variables exactly. Is it maybe this is a descriptive paper purpose. So, because empirical paper, we need to have variables, and I saw from the qualitative part, it's so good and it's theory developed. But from the quantitative part, I couldn't find exactly the variables in this study, or the constructs actually. About the analysis and discussion, I found that there should be some demographic data descriptive table that should be added. I saw from the, that questionnaire that there is a data. So better to have some descriptive tables and some explanation with that. And about the interviews, that how they analyze their interview. Is it any special software, or is it a special method for, that analyzing their interview results? How about the questionnaire? This is better to be clear for, I'm just talking for having a very good publication, and all these comments can help you to further improvement. So, again, in the discussion, although I found that it still needs some backup from the previous literature that you wrote in your literature review section, which is missing. And that's it. And I found that the practical and theoretical implications can be improved. Maybe there should be more practical implications of this study, and the limitation, although the authors mentioned about the sample size, but maybe they have mentioned some constraints that, because mostly we see that, okay, these are the limitations that authors have faced. So by answering them, so they can contribute good work. That's it from me. I hope that my comments can help you for your further improvement.
Thank you so much, Sahar. And now, Kim, you have exactly 3 minutes to respond to everything. And I will be brutal in cutting you off so we finish on time.
Okay, so first of all, thank you very much, Professor Sahar. Thank you very much. I think your comments are spot on. The literature review also, one of the key limitations for us was the lack of literature in the VC space and ESG space. So we needed to find workarounds, even already with the questionnaire in and of itself. As I said, the only really comprehensive study, we already referenced it in detail. So we probably need to find workarounds to, as you said, like establish the theory, especially the triple materiality concept lends itself to more theoretical approach, because there's quite a lot of literature that covers double materiality or financial materiality. So that would definitely be something that we can explore more to provide it like more of a theoretical framing around it. Then I would say, I would agree with you, it's more in the terms of descriptive, because the sample size does not really lend itself to like a large empirical study right now. And we would need to explain a little bit more, because we actually use actual real life data from an actual VC. And the problem for that was already we really needed to fight to get that data in the first place. So that was already a struggle to get that data. So the contribution would likely be providing an insight and providing the theoretical challenges of even carrying out ESG studies in the VC space, and then saying like, yeah, what are some of the challenges that we observed, but in what sense can we like contextualize that data? And that would be something that I really do appreciate. Do we get the comments? Do the commentators share them with us, or Uli, do you know that? Or
yeah, I mean, we can certainly make sure that you get them.
I can share, no problem. I can share it. Then you can have it in case. Yeah, I think that the topic is nice, but you need a bit more. I feel that with these kinds of data, you can go for the descriptive publication.
Yeah, a bit more meat on the bones. I do fully understand that. So, and your comments were spot on and fantastic. So I would really appreciate if you could share them with me, because I do want to integrate them. We want to integrate them really as much as possible, because you're absolutely right. So if we can get that, it would at least, the contribution would be much more evident in that sense. Thank you very much.
All the best.
All right. Thank you very much, Kim. Thanks a lot, Sahar. And indeed, thanks everyone who's been presenting today. So this concludes our first conference day. And tomorrow we continue at 2 p.m. Tokyo time with a keynote by Eugene Wong from the Sustainable Finance Institute Asia. So please join us tomorrow again. It's going to be interesting, and we have another interesting session on financing the transition to net zero. So thanks everyone. Have a good morning. For me, it's still morning, afternoon, evening, night, whatever it is. Thank you and bye-bye.